Danny McBride is back with another HBO comedy starring Danny McBride. This time it's called The Righteous Gemstones. He's here with me now. I'm Riley Chow of Gold Derby. Now, I went into the show expecting a satire on religion. Now, it turns out that was actually never your goal, as I've seen you discuss in other interviews. But another thing that I was not expecting was how much of the show would be this murder extortion plot with car pranks. Can you talk about using this new show to kind of experiment with genre and cross over into that kind of mob drama territory?
You know, it all comes from a very selfish place, and that is that I just like to try different things. I just get bored doing the same stuff. And, Rated R comedies had a very good run there for several years where it was everywhere you saw in the theaters and everything on TV. And we definitely got to participate in a lot of that. And, but it just is one of those things that like, my background isn't even in just particularly comedy. It's just in filmmaking. And so the idea to be able to try different genres is just something that I've always been interested in. And so, yeah, it became part of our like mission is like, how can you crack this story and be able to dip your toes in anything we want to tonally, and it's about trying to do that like tightrope dance and see how well you can pull it off.
So I'm wondering with a show that deals with religion so much, how much you actually talk about your own faith in the writer's room.
We had people of different faith. I had people who still attended church in the, who were, pretty religious in the writers' room. I had Jared Hess, who is who was a Mormon and grew up being a Mormon. And so it was, and then we had friends who were, grew up Catholic and people of different faiths. And, kind of what I was like really looking for is like, I don't want the pessimistic, like, take on religion. Like that's like too easy, like I want to figure out, like, I want to transcend that. And I want to make it about just like something altogether, just different. And so then we started kind of like, instead of like passing our judgments on what we thought about organized religion, it sort of just became about these like, I don't know, like patterns of like what Jared would see in his Mormon church to what our writer Chad would see in his Baptist church. And it was like sort of like finding those little touchstones, whether it's like somebody who presents themselves as self-righteous or somebody who's willing to donate a lot of money every week. And then in the meantime, they like have bad behavior behind closed doors. It was just sort of about finding these different archetypes that are just present in any sort of organized religion and just trying to make it relatable to people.
All right, so while we're talking about these kind of big topics, I want to jump over to diversity because there's so much talk in Hollywood about, hiring women, minorities, whoever. But with your shows, you're off in South Carolina, and so much of your crew has been kind of grandfathered in from your past shows, and then even going back further to your days in college. So I want to know how you kind of prioritize representation when you're staffing or what kind of thought process you have there.
A lot about like, our shows are, even how we write our shows are very different from like a traditional writer's room is. We keep a very, very small room and it's very intimate. Yeah. I mean, we don't really run a room where like we assign scripts to someone and they go off and do on their own. It's like we put together sort of a band of people who all sort of are picked for different skills. And so with doing that, the idea of like trying to find diverse voices is like 100% like a part of that, because if you only are able to pull on like 4 writers, you don't want 4 people who are going to just like have the same exact background that you have. And so that's just always something that it hasn't been like a mandate for us. It's just been something that we've always just tried to just do, so it's always just constantly trying to push yourself outside of what your comfort zone. I mean, sometimes when you are also like in the position we're in, where we work with a lot of our friends, it's easy to not reach outside of your circle just because I know this guy, I know what he does, and they can come in and do it. And so that's been another thing that's been kind of cool about writing a television show is that, a movie is like you staff it, you make it, and it's over, but a television show, when you staff it, you have a real chance to like grow with these people. So, I think it's very important to the process. Anything that's collaborative, it would be ridiculous to just staff your collaborations with just people who have your exact background. It's not useful.
So you've made, you've written all of season 2 now. I understand that you only shot for 2 days. But now that you've written the whole thing, how long do you see the show going? Are you still thinking about, 5+ seasons, as you were saying before?
I don't know. It's kind of, I think, just a matter of like when the story feels like it's done. I think when I embarked upon the show, I set it up intentionally to be a show that like when the season was over, it didn't like need to be like hinged upon a cliffhanger. I really wanted people to, when you tune into the season, it's a complete story from beginning, middle, and end. I find that that's what I like when I see television shows. I feel like it's, you can do a lot in TV that you can't do in movies with length and the stories you can tell, but movies are designed to give you a full experience, and sometimes I think television shows can fall into into that category where it's all about like tune in next week, and I just don't find that to be like gratifying. So we set this show up to have a lot of different characters and a lot of different storylines so that like if we wanted this show to kind of go on and on, there could be different arcs you could explore and different dynamics. When we were in something like Eastbound and Down, so much I was in every scene of that show, and so much of it we just kind of finished when we did because it felt like we were just getting into the territory of like Kenny goes to space. It just seemed like it was just getting to the point where it was ridiculous to keep the story going. And so with the structure of this and having so many characters, that was just a way to allow that if we want to keep doing this longer, we would have the material to do it.
Yeah, it was pretty surprising because I went into the show, I think after those comments had been made about how long you saw the show going. And then I got to the end of the season and everything was wrapped up.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny that that's surprising to people because it feels like that's how things should be.
Yeah.
Like, if you invest like 8 hours in watching something, it feels like, well, I should get an ending at least out of this,
Something I noticed that's different about this show versus your past ones is just the runtime of it. I mean, the first season of Vice Principals, you look at it, every single episode is 30 minutes, or going back to Eastbound and Down, like final season, every episode, 29, 30 minutes. This time, you've got episodes that are 50, 60 minutes, most of them 34, 38. I have my own kind of theories about why we're seeing this trend in the industry, but I'm wondering, I want to hear your take as somebody who's been here the whole time.
Well, it was, the runtime on Eastbound and VPs, like HBO really kept us to that tight 30 minutes. I mean, if you went over like 30, 20, I mean, that was a big conversation that you had to have. And there were pluses and minuses to that. I will say that almost every single episode we cut of Eastbound or Vice Principals, we would always get it to a cut that we really liked that would be around like 35, 36 minutes, and we'd be cool with it. And then we would have to get it down. And then that lasts it would take like 2 weeks to get like 5 minutes out of it because you would just have to really get creative of where that time would come from without losing your pacing or without just losing story elements that you kind of need. And, and so that's always just been a stressful thing. So I've always been interested in the idea of if we didn't have to have those really hard caps on 30 minutes, I think sometimes some of the storytelling suffers from it. But I think really the reason why we kind of got off on the pilot though of this one being longer and it being an hour was that I kind of also felt like looking at our other shows, I think people like make knee-jerk reactions about our shows. Like we present our shows, whether it's Eastbound or Vice Principals, to be one thing. And then for the person who watches and pays attention, you start to see that there's like deeper stories under something that's like made to kind of appear at first sight is something just sort of silly. And I feel like sometimes in the past, it's kind of a lot when people have so much to see to like get someone to say, just give us 3 episodes. Then you'll see where the character development starts. It seems like it's sort of a cop out. And I know me personally, I like don't give things a chance. If the shit doesn't start in the first episode, I'm like, I got too much else to watch. And so I really wanted a chance in that first episode to like really show people what this world really was. Like if it was only 30 minutes, I think we would have lost, some of the characterization of Edie's character, of Divine's character. I think some of the slower moments of just like Goodman processing his wife being gone, that stuff would have all had to been sped up. And I ultimately don't think it would have given the audience like a clear picture of like what the show was trying to bite off. And so, when I approached HBO and said, I'm down for doing a pilot, but I just want to have a little bit more running room to kind of like really sort of like give this show its legs. And it was helpful because then when we got to the second episode, I felt like the season was able to kind of take off. Like where we were at in the plotting of the second episode, like in our other seasons, I feel like we didn't get to that point until like the third or fourth episode. And so it just enabled us to sort of introduce the audience to all these people and set them in the world and get them used to it and then take them for the ride.
So if you're not cutting things after you've already shot them, I'm wondering what were the biggest things that you scrapped kind of earlier in the writing process, storylines that you decided not to materialize?
Man, it's so hard to. I don't even really know. It's like I went back recently through some of my old notebooks on vice principals, and like I saw some of the early ideas that we had for it. It's so funny how so much of it is like completely different from what ends up there. And it's ideas that I don't even kind of remember coming up with. And so this Gemstones is very much the same way that, we write it, and then at some point you just sort of forget any ideas you had, and it just sort of becomes like what it is. Now, when I was writing the original pilot, uh, I was just the main character, and there was no family element. I was a crooked minister who had an affair on his wife, and then it was about me and my wife trying to like navigate it. And when I wrote it, I'm like, man, this is tipping too much into just being a comment on religion, because there's no other dynamic to explore here than this guy who's crooked in his relationship to his congregation and to his wife. And there was just something about it that just felt like I wasn't telling the story I really wanted to tell. And so I kind of just thought more about it. And, and part of like how I want to present these guys was like, I really want to present them like they're like a band of outlaws, but they're operating a church, that they're kind of operating like mafiosos, but they're like, these like upstanding Christian leaders. And so the more I started doing that, I started kind of building, well, who's this outlaw gang? And I started kind of making characters in the church, but there was still something about it that just didn't connect. And then the moment that I started kind of like thinking about this family, it was like, that's what the show is. Like, a family is relatable, and there's things that you can talk about that are just outside of religion. You can still talk about religion, but there's something deeper here, that people can grab onto. Like, I'm not really that interested in seeing someone who doesn't believe in God make a show about God, and people who believe in it. Or, it's like, I don't know. Just to me, it was like a knee-jerk reaction of like, well, because I really couldn't even think of many movies, or especially comedies, that are even about religion that like interest me. I mean, it kind of just seems boring, And so to me, it was like the crime aspect, the family aspect. It was like, how can I just have other meatier things to explore in here?
Do you have a favorite joke from the first season?
Favorite joke?
Yeah.
I mean, you talked about Edie's monologue in Outback Steakhouse. Edie wrote that for another episode earlier in the season, but like she was telling the story to another character. And I mean, the first time I read it, I just fucking cried. I was in my house and just crying reading it. And I mean, it's just because Edie's so funny, but then even just imagining her like writing this and coming up with it, it was just making me laugh. And so even though it didn't make it into that episode, I had just like printed that monologue out and had it on my corkboard in my office and was like, I will find a place for this to go. I promise you, Edie. And so as we developed the rest of the season, it just came this moment where Edie needed to kind of explain herself to BJ, Tim Baltz's character. And it seemed like it was the perfect time to whip out the monologue about her old professor.
I want to go back a bit because I think one scene that made me cry and, I wasn't able to breathe while watching it was actually back on Vice Principals in the second episode when you and Walton Goggins crash the principal's house and ultimately burn it down. So can you give me any insight into what went into making that scene?
I mean, that scene was just, that scene was about just pure chaos. It was about two guys who were so consumed with rage and anger about the impotence in their own life of where they came out to. And they end up like meeting one another at the wrong time in each other's lives. And it creates this explosion, basically. It creates this destruction, and it takes innocent people down, and it takes their own lives down. And for us, that was sort of the challenge of it. That scene is exactly the reason why we sort of like wrote the show, because it was sort of this idea of like, let's present something that it feels like this is a broad comedy. It's two guys fighting over a job. And then let's like show these people that these are not guys that you want to win this thing. This isn't a broad comedy about two buddies. This is about something much darker and meaner. And I think it threw people for a loop, because I think once again, it's just that idea of, I think with a lot of our work, you have to kind of see it as a whole to understand like what it's truly about. And so it's easy for people to see something without really knowing us and not really knowing where we're from, and be confused by how things like, wait, these are the main characters. I'm supposed to like them, aren't I? Like, well, how can they do this? But I guess what we're exploring with that is like, you don't have to like the main character. And like, maybe that's not what the point of this is. Like, you know, maybe it's about sort of like, who the fuck are these people? Who would do something like this, and what drove them to this, you know? And that's sort of kind of what we were exploring with that show. I mean, we've kind of laid that show out as a part one and a part two, and, you know, and no more. It was never like made to be some sort of like, you know, formula for just like endless episodes. It was very specific about what it was trying to bite off. And we always looked at it that the first season was about crime, and then the second season was about punishment, you know, and these guys sort of like navigate that situation and kind of end up on top despite all the horrible things that they've done. And then the second season is just about the karmic repercussions of these actions, and about how they each kind of have to pay in their own way for the decisions that they've made. And they have to take accountability for their life sort of not being where it wants to because of themselves and not other people.
So we're doing this chat in the during Emmy campaign season. The Righteous Gemstones will be on the Emmy ballot this year. I think you should have gotten a couple Emmys, at least for vice principals, for producing, for acting. And, you know, the show, it does, or your shows have had success and followings. I remember a couple of years ago when Curb Your Enthusiasm was coming back after it was gone for a number of years, and there was all that media hype about that, but more people were actually tuning into vice principals right after. So I'm wondering what your take is on why your shows have not really been connecting with awards.
You know, I don't know, man. I don't know. I honestly don't really spend too much time thinking about it. It's like you know, I just feel grateful that I have an opportunity to kind of like tell the kind of risky stories that I like to tell, and to tell stuff that is just like left of center. And I just kind of focus on that and just like let the work sort of speak for itself. You know, I have like, I'm uncomfortable, like, you know, being a celebrity. And I would be uncomfortable going around and like tooting my own horn about my work too. It's just not something like, when I see people get nominated for shows, I'm like, God, it would suck to have to sit through that whole entire thing. So, I mean, I'm not someone who say like, we don't need awards, but at the end of the day, like the thrill I get from this stuff is really just the thrill of collaboration. It's like the idea that I get to make something out of nothing, you know, with people that I've known since I was 18 years old. And every show we meet new people, we're on new adventures, we're discussing stuff that's different. And I don't know, I think that to me is what I like about doing this. And if critical acclaim doesn't come with it, it's not the end of the world. I mean, like, we've been beat up enough times by the critics that we've just trained ourselves to not even pay attention to what they say.
And finally, can you tease season 2? And I heard that there might be a standalone Christmas episode coming out this year.
Well, you know, we were 2 days into shooting the second season before South Carolina like locked everything down here. So yeah, that shooting of this season was postponed. Everything was written and it was finished. We were ready to go, but it's been postponed. And now because of some actors' availabilities and stuff, we really won't be shooting the second season until the beginning of next year. But in the meantime, just to kind of get our crew back to work and to kind of give audiences like another piece of the Gemstones, since they won't get it this year, I've written a Christmas special that we're going to try to shoot, and it'll be an hour long and about a 2-week shoot. So hopefully we get to do it. You know, the numbers in South Carolina are like rising, so I don't know what will happen, but obviously the health and safety of like our cast and crew is what's most important. So we have a script and HBO's into it and we're into it, but we'll see if we're able to pull it off, I guess.
Yeah. Well, Danny, thanks so much for taking the time to chat. You can watch other interviews that we've done with people from the Righteous Gemstones and also other Emmy contenders on our YouTube channel, and go to goldderby.com to make your own Emmy predictions.
I appreciate that. Thanks a lot.